Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep into the Department of Justice. We're looking at a pretty, I guess you could say, controversial period during the Trump
There's
administration.
definitely a lot of tension, a lot going on during that time.
Yeah. And the source material, I mean, it's fascinating. You almost can't put it down. It reads like a political thriller.
It does, full of internal conflict, ethical dilemmas. You see these accusations of corruption, and not just on some small level. We're talking about the highest levels of government.
And I think what's so important about all of this, about what we're going to talk about today, is it raises questions about the entire system. I mean, the integrity of the justice system itself, which ideally should be completely blind to any sort of political influence.
Right. In this case, the prosecution of Eric Adams, it really brings all of that into focus. It doesn't even matter the specifics of the crimes themselves, the pressure to just dismiss the whole thing. It came from way up top, and that set off this chain of events that exposed some serious rifts within the DOJ.
Yeah, these prosecutors must have been under immense pressure. So let's talk about who these people are, who these key players are. Because what they did, and I think even more so their reasons for doing it, that's really at the heart of all of this. So let's start with Pam Bondi. She was Attorney General during this whole thing. But, and this is crucial, she was also a former personal lawyer for Trump.
And that connection, it's really fuel for the fire when it comes to accusations of political interference, right? Because the argument is that Bondi, because she was so close to Trump, she was basically forcing prosecutors to drop the case. It was loyalty over, well, the rule of law, critics argue.
Absolutely. And it leads to the question, a very fundamental question.
Yeah.
Were these legal decisions being made because of the facts of the case? Or were they being made for political reasons?
A huge question. It really cuts to the core of our justice system.
For sure. And then you have these career prosecutors,
Hmm.
right? People who basically refuse to go along with it all. Like the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. Interesting fact, he was conservative and even clerked for Justice Scalia. Right.
A figure known for his very strict interpretation of the law. So this wasn't some liberal activist or anything. This was someone deep in the conservative legal world.
And his refusal to dismiss the case, given all the pressure, it really speaks volumes. It's like he was saying, I took an oath to follow the law. I didn't swear an oath to any political agenda.
Exactly. And, he wasn't the only one. The assistant U.S. attorney, who, by the way, had clerked for Chief Justice Roberts, he resigned too. In protest. He didn't want to compromise his integrity. I think it was in his resignation letter that he said he wouldn't be a fool or coward.
Powerful words.
Yeah, so he basically saw dismissing the case as both, morally wrong and just damaging to his reputation.
Makes you wonder, like, how widespread this resistance was. It seems like people were drawing a line. They were refusing to bow to political pressure. Yeah, and then it gets even more interesting. The case, they actually took it away from the Southern District of New York and gave it over to the Public Integrity section of the DOJ. Now, you'd think, okay, this section, they're all about investigating government corruption, right? So surely this is where you'd get a completely fair and impartial review of everything.
You'd think so, but even they didn't want to dismiss the charges. It's almost like no matter where this case landed, you had these career prosecutors pushing back, saying no to what they saw as just way too much political influence.
It's like this battle for the soul of the DOJ is happening right in front of us.
Yeah, an internal struggle.
Yeah, and to really ramp up the intensity here, some reports say that there was this meeting, and prosecutors were basically threatened in this meeting. Like, they were told that unless someone agreed to drop this case, people would be fired. I mean, can you imagine being in that room?
Wow. You can just feel the tension, the turmoil within the department. Think about it. These are dedicated professionals. These are people who have devoted their lives to upholding the law, and suddenly they're in this position, this impossible choice. They have to decide. Do they keep their careers? Or do they stand by their principles?
A terrible position to be in.
And that's exactly how political pressure can undermine, really undermine the foundations of our whole system.
And then we come to Ed Sullivan. He's the prosecutor who eventually filed the motion to dismiss the case. But the thing is, some of our sources say he basically took one for the team,
Interesting.
like sacrificing himself to save his colleagues' jobs.
It's a tough situation. I mean, on the one hand, he's the one who actually carries out this action that so many people saw as a complete miscarriage of justice. But on the other hand, maybe he felt he was shielding everyone else from that impossible choice we just talked about.
Yeah, and it makes you think, what choices are even left when you're in a system that seems to reward loyalty over doing what's right? It's like, how do you do your job and still keep your moral compass pointed in the right direction?
It's a real dilemma, one that many people probably face, even if the stakes aren't quite this high. I mean, we've all had to weigh our own interests against, well, what we believe in.
Absolutely. And to help us sort through all of this, we've got Harry Littman. He's a former DOJ official and a legal commentator. Now,
Okay.
Littman, he doesn't mince words. He calls this whole situation a straight-up case of good versus evil, corruption versus just doing your job.
Littman's perspective is so valuable here because he really knows the DOJ inside and out. He's seen how it all works, the good, the bad, and everything in between. So when he makes an assessment like that, it carries a lot of weight. It's like he's saying this wasn't just some disagreement about legal strategy or something. This was a fundamental
A
violation.
breach of trust, absolutely.
Exactly. And a subversion of the whole justice system.
A really, really damning indictment of what was happening. And you might be thinking at this point, well, this is depressing. It's like the bad guys are winning, justice is losing. But there is this glimmer of hope in this whole story. There's a sign that maybe, just maybe, this fight for integrity isn't over yet.
It's true. I mean, despite all the pressure, the threats, all of that, you still had these prosecutors, and they were willing to put it all on the line. They were willing to resign rather than compromise what they believed in.
Yeah, it's almost like this quiet rebellion happening.
Exactly. A refusal to be complicit in something that felt so wrong.
And it just makes you wonder, what does it say about where we are as a country, as a society, when even the people whose job it is to uphold the law feel like they have to rebel?
Right. What does that say about our institutions? It's a question worth pondering. And it takes us right to these different perspectives that our sources offer. On the one hand, you have Bondi, right? She's claiming these prosecutors were acting on pretext, which is a legal term. It suggests they were using this case to push some hidden agenda. It's basically like she's accusing them of using the department as a weapon instead of trying to actually get justice.
And then on the other hand, you have the prosecutors themselves. And they're saying, no, we were simply doing our jobs, following the law, upholding our oaths. They argue they were doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. No political bias at all. So who are we supposed to believe? How do you even begin to sort through all these conflicting viewpoints?
It's the big challenge, isn't it? You've got all these powerful figures making accusations back and forth. It can be really hard to figure out what actually happened. But I think what we have to do is look past all the rhetoric and focus on the actions. What did people do? Why did they do it? And what were the consequences?
Exactly. It's like trying to solve a puzzle.
Right. You're looking for those little clues, those things that might help reveal the bigger picture.
And in part 2 of our deep dive, we're going to do just that.
Hmm.
We're going to explore what happened after this mutiny, I guess you could call it, within the DOJ. We're going to talk about the long-term consequences and really consider what all of this means for the future of justice in America. So stay tuned.
Definitely stay tuned because there's a lot more to uncover.
A whole lot more. We're back. And, I've been thinking about those prosecutors, the ones who were willing to put their careers on the line for what they thought was right. That takes guts, serious guts, especially when you're going up against some very powerful people.
Yeah, no doubt. And it really highlights something we talked about earlier, like just how fragile our institutions actually are. The DOJ, it's supposed to be this pillar of justice, but when you have political influence creeping in, it undermines the whole thing. People lose trust.
It makes you think, if this kind of pressure can happen in a case this big, this high profile, what's happening in the cases we don't even hear about, the ones that don't make the news?
It's a chilling thought. And as we dig deeper into this whole thing, you see it goes beyond just this one case. It's like a pattern.
Yeah.
Our sources, I mean, these are former DOJ officials, legal experts, they all point to this culture within the department.
Yeah.
Like, loyalty to Trump, it was almost more important than actually following the rule of law.
Wow.
It's like those safeguards, the norms, the principles that are supposed to guide the DOJ, they were being chipped away,
Eroded.
Exactly. And it brings up this big question. If you can't even trust the people whose literal job it is to uphold the law, who can you trust?
It's a question that gets to the heart of what it means to live in a democracy, right?
Yeah.
We depend on institutions like the DOJ to make sure things are fair, to make sure people in power are held accountable. But if those institutions are compromised, I mean, where does that leave us?
Some serious concerns there. And it's not just something we're seeing here in the U.S. either, This rise in populism, authoritarianism, it's a global trend. And one thing they all seem to have in common is they try to undermine the judicial system, weaken it.
So you're saying this situation with the DOJ, it could be part of something bigger. this global shift away from democracy.
I think that's a very valid interpretation, and it's important to keep that broader context in mind. This wasn't just some isolated thing, it's part of a pattern, and it should worry anyone who believes in, well, in democratic principles.
So then what do we do? What can we do to protect ourselves, our communities from this, this erosion of justice, this abuse of power? It feels so huge.
Yeah, it's easy to feel powerless when you're dealing with something this big, this systemic, but there are things we can do. The first thing, and this is so important, is to stay informed. Know what's going on, understand the issues, be willing to have these tough conversations.
And it's not enough to just like passively read the news, right?
Hmm.
We have to be active. We have to participate.
Absolutely. Democracy, it takes work. It takes all of us doing our part. We have to vote, contact our representatives, support organizations that are fighting for what's right, and, speak out against injustice when we see it.
So earlier we were talking about all these conflicting stories, right? Pam Bondi saying the prosecutors had some ulterior motive,
Yep.
and then the prosecutors saying, no, we were just doing our jobs. But let's step back for a second. Can we distill some key takeaways from all of this? Regardless of who's right or wrong, what can we learn?
That's a great question. One big takeaway, and I think this is clear, is that we need a strong, independent judicial system. This whole situation shows what can happen when you have political pressure trying to influence legal decisions. We need judges and prosecutors who can make decisions based on the law, not what's politically convenient.
It also shows the dangers of political interference, not just in the justice system, but in any part of the government. When those in power put their own interests first, ahead of the public good, it erodes trust. It weakens the whole system.
For sure. Another takeaway, and this is crucial, is the importance of courage. The courage to stand up and say, this is wrong. Those prosecutors who resigned, they were risking everything. Their careers, their livelihoods. They could have taken the easy way out, but they didn't. They said, no, we're not going to be a part of this.
A powerful reminder that we all have choices. We can choose to go along with a corrupt system, or we can choose to resist. We can choose to stay silent, or we can choose to speak up.
And you know what? Sometimes when someone speaks up, it inspires others to do the same. It can create this ripple effect, this movement for change. And that brings us to another takeaway: hope. Even though this situation was so bleak, the fact that these prosecutors were willing to risk it all, it gives me hope.
Me too. It shows there are still people, even within these institutions, who are committed to doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs them something.
And that brings us back to what we can do. We can support those people, we can amplify their voices, and we can demand better from our leaders. We can't just sit back and watch.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to talk about something else that I find fascinating. Ambition. Self-preservation. We've been focusing on the prosecutors who quit, who took a stand. But what about the ones who didn't? The ones who stayed silent, who went along with it? Even if they had doubts, are they complicit?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I don't think there's an easy answer. It's impossible to know what was going through their heads, what they were thinking, what pressures they were facing.
Yeah. And it's easy for us to judge from the outside, but I think it's important to try to understand, they were in a system that was broken, where loyalty seemed to be valued more than integrity. Maybe they felt like there were no good options.
And remember, even if they were just trying to protect themselves, their actions still had consequences. By staying silent, by going along with it all, they helped create this environment where people in power thought they could get away with anything. They might have been trying to save their own careers, but they might have also helped to weaken the whole system.
That's a sobering thought. It makes you realize how much our actions are connected, how even little decisions can have big ripple effects. And it makes you wonder how we can build a system where people feel like they can do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it might cost them.
The million-dollar question, right? I don't have all the answers, but I think it starts with leadership. We need leaders who set a good example, who encourage people to speak up when they see something wrong, and who create a culture where people are held accountable for their actions.
And it's not just about having good leaders at the top. It's about creating that culture of shared responsibility throughout the whole organization. Everyone, from the newest employee to the person in charge, they all need to feel like they can speak up if they see something wrong.
Exactly. We need a system that protects whistleblowers, that rewards people for doing the right thing, and that punishes those who abuse their power. A system where doing what's right is seen as a good thing, not a risk.
That's a big goal, but I think it's what we need if we really want a society that's fair and just for everyone. All right, we're back in the thick of this DOJ saga. It's been quite a journey, right? We've seen power struggles, we've talked about ethics, and really this whole battle for, what justice even means.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, even if it is a bit unsettling. And as we wrap up our little exploration here, it really hits me how much we still don't know. There are questions that might never get answered. And the people who might have done some pretty bad stuff, they might never actually be held accountable.
It's tough, right? That lack of transparency, the fact that powerful people can just, I don't know, maybe get away with things, it just makes you feel like the system isn't fair, like it's rigged or something.
It's a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
And it speaks to this bigger issue, this accountability problem, not just in the DOJ, but really in government as a whole. When people at the top don't face consequences for their actions, people lose faith. It weakens the entire foundation of, well, a democracy.
And even with all the unknowns, all this stuff we might never find out, I think what we have to do is focus on what we can learn from this whole experience. I mean, throughout our deep dive here, we've seen how important transparency is. We've seen the dangers of too much power in the hands of a few, and we've seen just how much courage it takes to stand up and speak truth to power.
Absolutely. These are lessons that go way beyond the DOJ. They apply to all of us, no matter what we do, no matter what our political beliefs are. These are about the core principles, the things a just and fair society is built on.
And I think the biggest takeaway, and maybe the most important one, is that we, the citizens, we have a part to play in protecting those principles.
You're right.
We can't just sit back and hope for the best. We have to be involved. We have to be informed. We have to participate.
Sometimes when we talk about these big, complex political issues, it's easy to lose sight of how it impacts us on a personal level. Like, how does all this maneuvering at the top, this possible corruption in the DOJ, how does it affect our everyday lives?
It's a great question. It's easy to think of this as just another political drama, something happening way out there, far removed from our own experiences. But the truth is, when the justice system is messed up, when the rule of law is weakened, it affects everyone.
Think about it. If people in power can twist the justice system to get what they want, if they don't have to play by the rules, what does that mean for the rest of us? What does that mean for our safety? It creates this feeling that things are unpredictable, like the rules don't apply to everyone equally.
And that unpredictability, that can have real consequences in our lives. It can affect our access to healthcare, to education, to jobs, even to our personal safety. If you can't trust the system to protect your rights, if you don't believe everyone is being treated fairly, it makes you feel insecure. It makes you wonder if things will ever be okay.
Exactly. So while this story might seem like some distant political thing, it actually matters a lot. It shows us just how crucial it is to have a justice system that's fair, a system that works for everyone, not just the powerful.
So what can we do? How do we protect ourselves, our families, our communities from all of this? From the corruption, from the abuse of power. It feels so big, so overwhelming.
I know what you mean, but I think the first step is realizing that we're not powerless. We have a voice, we have a vote, and we can hold our leaders accountable.
And that starts with being informed, right? We need to understand what's going on, know what the issues are, and be willing to have those tough conversations, even when they're uncomfortable.
For sure, we can't just passively consume the news anymore. We have to be active. We have to participate. Go vote. Contact your representatives, support organizations that are fighting for what's right. And when we see injustice, we have to call it out. We have to say something.
And it's not just about individual actions either. It's about creating communities, places where these values are shared, where people feel safe, speaking their minds, challenging those in charge, and demanding better.
You got it. Because at the end of the day, this fight for justice, it's something we have to do together. It takes all of us working together, being informed and holding each other accountable.
We started this whole deep dive looking at corruption and abuse of power in the Department of Justice. We talked about all the different sides of the story, the ethical questions, and how all of this could cause some serious damage to our institutions. But I think it's important to end on a hopeful note. We have to remember that we have the power to make things better.
I completely agree. We have the power to demand transparency, to hold our leaders accountable, and to build a system where justice actually wins. And that power, it starts with each and every one of us.
So to everyone listening, here's our challenge to you. Don't let this story just fade away. Keep talking about it, keep the conversation going, engage with your communities, and never stop fighting for a world that's more fair, more just for everyone. Because the future of justice, it really is in our hands.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep fighting for a better tomorrow.